Hey everyone, we're live with ITP faculty members Allison, Parrish, and Tom Igoe. We're here to answer any of your questions about ITP, and they're also going to be talking a little bit more about their work. So thanks for joining us this morning, and if you have any questions, please put it in the comment section, and we will get to it. So can you introduce yourselves? Say a little bit about your background and your projects.
So hi, I'm Tom Igoe. I teach here at ITP. I've been here. I sort of came as a student and forgot to leave. This is true, I think, of many of us. Or I left for a little while and came back. I've been here since 2001 full-time. I run the physical computing area of the curriculum, where we try to teach students that you can't really do computing without it being grounded in your physical reality, because you've got a body and so does the computer. And we can change the way the computer interacts with you by changing the way it sees you, the way it senses you, and so forth. I also teach about networks, and I try to weave a theme of sustainability through a lot of my classes.
So I'm Allison, Parrish. This is my second year teaching here full-time. I was adjunct here for a really long time before that, and then I'm also a graduate of the program. So they tried to kick me out, but I came back. So I teach, the class that I've taught for a long time is called Reading and Writing Electronic Text, which is a class about how to take language apart with computers and then put it back together with computers. It's, I introduce people to it as a computer-generated poetry class. So it's a class about generating poetry with words, but along the way you learn about just like general programming concepts as well. And a class that I introduced last year is called Electronic Rituals, Oracles, and Fortune Telling, which is a class about the idea of divination and its analogs and applications in design and just digital culture and digital making of things in general. So,
Great. And can you give sort of a brief overview of ITP and maybe what a typical day in the life of an ITPer is? I know there's no typical, but sort of generally speaking.
I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about this, actually.
That sounds like
I think I have my own very idiosyncratic idea, so.
Yeah. What a day in the life of an ITPer is like? I think for a lot of the students, they tend to be here on the floor a good bit of the time. I would say most of them tend to show up late morning at the earliest, unless they've got an early morning class. They tend to be in class and or hanging out on the floor a lot, and one thing I've noticed is they spend, because a lot of our classes involve collaborations, a lot of their effort goes into figuring out when they can coordinate with their classmates. I hear from a lot of my students that, well, I got a meeting with so-and-so at this time, and a meeting with so-and-so at this time, and then I'm finally getting around to building my projects later on tonight. I think that the early part of the day tends to be pretty intensely social, and the latter part of the day tends to be pretty intensely, let's build. But when I say social, I also mean work social, because they're talking about projects they're working on and that kind of thing. But I'm curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so I was also a professor not a professor, I was an artist in residence at Fordham in an English department at Fordham University. And I also was an undergraduate in a humanities program, and I have to say that the biggest difference between ITP and other programs is just like, we don't stress that name, interactive telecommunications program, but like the communications part is actually super important. Like, people here actually talk to each other and interact with each other all the time, and that's unlike other programs where I've been a student or where I've been a teacher, where it's just sort of like students show up in the morning, they go to class, and then maybe they don't talk to their classmates ever, except at like department sanctioned events. Whereas here it's just like a almost totally student-driven experience. Like most of the ideas, most of the energy comes from the students talking to each other.
Yeah.
So that plus like you have a computer or electronics and you're making things, and that's basically ITP.
I think you hit the nail on the head. But Dan O'Sullivan usually likes to say that the classes here are just an excuse for people to hang out with each other. I think it does really tend to form a lot of bonds. I can think of a lot of alumni bonds that have formed, and little clusters of people either starting companies or working with each other or just hanging out, or goes all kinds of directions.
Yeah,
What are sort of the general themes, I guess, of what people are exploring here? I mean, it's a very broad question, but what are some of the things that you've seen come up in the last few years?
Right. Well, Tom has made a big list recently of that, actually.
It's funny, I made a list and now I'm forgetting all of it. Jeez. I mean, I think there are certainly technical themes, but more interesting are the sort of application themes, the fields of culture and life that people apply their work to. So we certainly see a lot of art or expressive work. We see a lot of instructive work, people using these tools to make new instructional material. We see a lot of instrumental work, people making new tools. I think we get a certain number of students who come in with an interest in social advocacy or social justice. We try to also promote the same thing about environmental justice. So I guess you could put it that we get a certain number of students who are interested in how to make this stuff play fair with the world. But we also get those who come in that want to start a business or that want to apply it to their previous work. You know, we've seen people from various forms of occupational or physical therapy who then apply it back to their work. I don't know, what else we got?
I think that I've been thinking about a lot lately is like the history of like hacker culture. And I think of like the West Coast hacker culture that had like, you know, Steve Wozniak and even Ted Nelson and people like that, where it was about like, okay, industry has produced this thing, like the microcontroller or like the Kinect or whatever. What are the unexpected applications of that? And that's really what happens at ITP is we just like, you know, buy stuff that now you can get off the shelf, and then we figure out what does this mean, what does it do, what can it do that is unexpected. And that applies, you know, in all of those areas, the conceptual areas that you mentioned. But that's like, for me, the technical thing about ITP is like taking the thing off the shelf and then like breaking it or making it do something different or making it do something weird. In that like classic hacker, not in like the illegal sense way, but like hacker in the like old days way of like repurposing technology to do something new and interesting and subversive potentially.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that I think your work typifies really right that I find interesting too, which is there is this thread of, for want of a better term, public intellectualism, of people who they may be making art, they may be teaching, they may be making commercial work, but they're not just doing the work. They're also saying what are its effects? How is it spreading out to the world? And they're finding various ways to express it, and that some of that arises from some of the structures of New York culture itself a little bit. You know, Stacey Horn, who taught here years ago, used to talk about the online bulletin board she started Echo as a sort of, you know, online Algonquin roundtable, which was maybe a bit grandiose, but that spirit I think still goes through of, you know, we're not just doing this, we're also getting together to talk about it and to figure out how it shapes things according to our ideals. Yeah,
and that also reflects like you're more likely to hear about an ITP project in like the, you know, consumer electronics press, like Gizmodo or like Boing Boing or something like that, than you would be to hear about it in like a scientific journal or something like that. Like it's very outwardly publicly oriented to sort of, there's like a showmanship to it, I guess. Yeah. Also, which is something that I really like.
Yeah, me too.
So ITP is technically considered a STEM program. I guess we kind of see ourselves more of STEAM. But, you know, one of the questions that I get a lot is, you know, how much technical experience do I need? And we always say you don't need the technical background. What's the approach, do you think, for people without that technical background to come here? How do they find their way through? How do they learn all the things that they need to learn?
Yeah, we're not expecting any kind of technical background at all. I think that's part of what gives the program its energy, and it's you know, the start of the teaching philosophy from day one is we're just like not expecting any technical knowledge whatsoever. that phrase technical knowledge is like dividing the world up into a weird way, thinking about like what counts as technical and what doesn't count as technical, because I'm a programmer, but if I like went up to a dancer, I'm sure they would have all kinds of technical knowledge about dancing that I just don't know about.
And actually, that's really important. I think we don't expect people to have any knowledge of computing or electronics or media production when they come in the door. We teach what we see as the basics of that in our intro classes.
Yeah.
But we do expect them to have a history, to have an experience of something or other. So what happens in classes a lot is we spend a lot of the first intro classes really figuring out how to get people to recognize each other's backgrounds and figure out how those backgrounds can be useful in building things together. So, like as you said, if we see dancers come in, Mimi Yin's a good example of on faculty, right? She is, background as a dancer, also a very good programmer nowadays too, and she combines those two fairly fluidly. In class, you often get someone who will, while they're still learning the programming side of things, be able to look at it from, say, a visual design perspective and say, hey, you know what, this is really screwed up, we can fix this. Or look at it from a semantic point of view and say, what kind of message is this sending to the people we're building it for? And that's as important as the technical side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So we have one question, BB online. Hi, BB. So she came to the spring show and loved the ITP program. Her question is, to boost the chances of getting in, what would you suggest to someone who was on the waiting list this past year? That's a hard question.
That's a hard question.
Jeez, I would usually throw that question to Midori. Yeah. But, for me, in terms of application, I would say, tell us a good story. When we're reading through applications, what really impresses us and gets people in the door is often not so much do you have this fantastic CV, or do you do you tick off all these boxes as to the skills you've got, but what's your life been like, and how does that reflect your ideals, and where do you want to go with what you're learning in terms of your ideals? I guess that, for me, that works kind of.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to think about someone as a potential student if they have like, I don't know how to answer this question. If it feels like there's an existing kind of passion, an existing if not body of work, then at least like a demonstrated commitment to making stuff happen. And this is a very bad answer to this question.
Figuring out how to make things happen in the world.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I think the key is, really, what is your passion? Tell us what you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be interactive media related. I mean, if so, why are you coming here, right? So you can apply your passion to what we do here at ITP. So make sure that comes out.
Yeah, and actually one thing we often forget to mention, because it's sort of so ingrained in the place, is tell us about the people you've worked with. Tell us about your relationships with the folks you've worked with, you play with, etc. Because, again, like Allison was saying, this is such an intensely social place that people who come looking for, I just want to have a studio in a garret somewhere and make my own art for a couple of years, or anything like that, they tend to find themselves kind of uncomfortable because they're surrounded by so many people. It's weird. It's both intensely social and filled with an awful lot of introverts, but I think in some ways those two things can work together.
Great. So I want to just turn it to our alumni for a little bit. Just a little shout out to some of our alums who are tuning in. James, Emily, Tommy. So hello. Thanks for watching. So can you both talk a little bit about the alumni network? I mean, it's one of those places. Once they leave the fourth floor, they're not really ever gone, right? So talk about our relationship, the department's relationship with our alumni, and what network our grads are joining into.
Yeah. We I think, again, we sort of forget to leave each other a lot, which is to say we spend a lot of time with each other. It is a very active alumni network. Alums tend to socialize and hire each other and work together on a lot of different projects. And I think tend to sort of look out for each other. I mean, one of the things I've found encouraging is whenever I've got a new student leaving here and who's, say, going to another city, they'll often say, well, do you know anybody in X city? And first thing I'll do is look and see who from the alumni list happens to be working there and say, okay, why don't you call that person? I think that's, as much as anything, that's one of the real values of the place, are the people you connect with.
Yeah, I mean, almost all of my professional opportunities since graduating have come through the ITP Alumni Network in some way. After I graduated, I went to work with some other people that graduated in the same year as me. Obviously, I work here now, so that's part of that alumni network. It's also, I think, one of the unique strengths of the alumni of ITP is that they're very interdisciplinary, which means that being a graduate of ITP means that I sort of already have my foot in the door, not in just one particular field, but in a whole collection of fields, which is super valuable as someone who does interdisciplinary work, knowing that if I need to talk to somebody at a startup, or if I need to talk to somebody at a university, or talk to somebody at a big corporation or whatever. That's not a good example of how broad it is, but that's key. That's a lot of value.
Yeah, and I think that's tied to the question earlier of what makes it easier to get in is, we kind of don't want to take people and just say, whatever you were doing, we don't care, we're going to turn you into a technologist. Mm-hmm. We rather want to say, you were doing this thing, you can see how these tools intersect with what you're doing. Okay, maybe there's a slight change, of course, but we kind of hope you're going to keep doing what you were doing. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about it because after work last night, I went out to hang out with Jody Culkin and Eric Hagan, who are both alums and who are both teaching at different schools now. Mm-hmm. And we were spending a lot of time both talking about their individual artwork, but also about what was going on in their classes and their programs, and finding ways that we could say, hey, is there something we can do informally together between schools that would help both of us? And I've seen a lot of conversations like that happen.
Yeah.
Great. So we have a question online. Tundi, I don't know if I'm saying your name right. She'd love to hear your thoughts on how the school prepares students after graduation, specifically in the context of entrepreneurship or working with technology companies like Google, Uber, etc. She has a second part to that question, but we'll just do this one first.
I think in some ways a lot of what we were just talking about speaks to the first part of it. We do have a pretty good network of places where we know people might end up working, and we do our best to help students position themselves to apply at those places. It's in terms of entrepreneurship, what's funny is I can think of a lot of people who've come out of here and started businesses, but don't necessarily call themselves entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
They started it because they're like, well, I need this to happen, so I'm going to start this structure, right? We don't tend to be the type that's going to start the next Uber, I hope, but we do tend to start a lot of small businesses or small agencies. And I think that's an important thing. And I think within the larger companies, a lot of the people we position tend to be, or try to be instigators. I'm thinking, for example, of Alex Kaufman at Google,
sure,
or Amit Pataru, who's also there. They're essentially doing art and creative work inside of Google as a way to push the engineers to think a little more about the possibilities for their tools. So I guess that's the first part of her question. Mm-hmm. What's the second part?
And also Uber is coming, I think it's next Thursday, for a talk. So we have these big companies that come through. Apple was just here recruiting as well. NYU also has the Leslie E Lab, which is the the Entrepreneurship Center. I don't remember. They support all entrepreneurship types of ventures, and they're really, really great. So that's a great resource. The other part of the question is around collaborating with students from Stern or the Tandon School of Engineering, particularly with the move to the Brooklyn campus. Are there resources like this, and if so, how does ITP foster these relationships? So this actually is a good time to talk about the move to Brooklyn as well.
Well, first on the Stern question, there's an entrepreneurship challenge they run every year that many of us have been involved in. I think you were involved in one, weren't you? No, I'm thinking of people of your year. Sorry, Dorian and Evan.
Well, they were the ones in the competition, but then they hired me
Right.
after they won.
Right.
So I definitely benefited from that.
Right. Let's note that we won the Stern competition.
Right.
So yeah, those kind of things certainly do happen. And with Tandon, we're looking forward to seeing what grows once we get out there. We're going to, in some ways, miss some of our connections here at Tisch, but we're trying to build both as much as we can. And as far as the move to Brooklyn goes, yeah, we're moving to Brooklyn. What do you want to know?
Can you talk about the facilities that are being planned in Brooklyn? It's kind of a moving target, but
Yeah. I mean, it's a much larger space. It's surprisingly larger. I think we haven't even really come to terms with how much bigger it is. And that's a good thing for one reason, which is just that here in the current facility, it's very cramped. But I think we're also still trying to figure out ways to make sure it has the same flow, where it just feels like you're always walking through something exciting and interesting that's happening. But I think that it's great in Brooklyn. I personally think that being closer to the engineering part of the school will lead to interesting collaborations and opportunities, and dissuading some of those Tandon students from doing too much engineering and maybe more art and design. So I think it'll be good. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I think another thing's going to happen that's interesting is that we often sort of say, well, we're trying to reform engineering, but in some ways we're going to get a better chance for engineering to hopefully show us their own perspective in more depth.
Yeah,
yeah. We oftentimes you start a conversation based on assumptions, but until you have that everyday contact, you don't really know what that life is really like, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. And as Allison said, it is a big space, and despite the fact that when we're sitting on architecture meetings about it, I'll look and go, oh, this isn't big enough, we need more. It is a big space.
Yeah, when you're there and just looking down the whole
long hall.
Very, very, very big.
and very few offices, still very sort of open, collaborative space that will move a lot.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, again, what we're trying to do is wherever the architects draw a wall, we're like, no, let's erase that. And it's going to be, I think, in some ways more not unified exactly, but more in tune with the other departments in that building. That's certainly what the university's hoping for. And it'll be interesting to see how that happens exactly. Because, for example, our classrooms, unlike now, will be shared with IDM and with some of the other departments. And
IDM is the Integrated Digital Media Master's Program over at Tandon.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that's actually going to lead to some interesting juxtapositions that we haven't thought of yet.
Yeah.
Well, one question is, how does ITP differ from Tandon's IDM program?
That's a good question.
Well, the answer I've been giving lately that I got from Luc Dubois, who runs the IDM, is particularly when you think about the IDM's undergraduate and the undergraduate that we're starting. For those students who are coming and want primarily an engineering degree but would like to do creative work, IDM's the place to be. For those students who are coming and want primarily a liberal arts degree but want an intersection with technology, ITP or IMA is the place to be.
It is definitely a very subtle difference. I've actually taught in both places. I taught in IDM 2 years ago. And it had a very similar vibe. It was just a different cross-section of people, more or less. As a teacher, I felt like I had license to go a little bit deeper into the technical stuff and to expect a little bit more technical rigor from those students, but that might have just been my own headcanon of what those students were like. Yeah.
It's an important thing, though, right? Because I mean, even if your expectations as a teacher are a little off, they still set the tone for what things are going to be. And hopefully students will push back when they're too far off. But sometimes you end up with new directions that way that you didn't expect.
Yeah. There's just a difference between when I was teaching in the graduate, I was teaching an introductory programming class in the graduate, which means that I had the classroom was like half full of like electrical engineers who had never actually done computer programming. So like, versus here at ITP where you don't have those same people with an engineering background. In both cases, nobody knew how to program. So it's just like a slightly different approach. But the projects were actually very similar that came out of it. So.
And they're going to be in the same building, I believe, right? I think like just one floor
yeah.
below us. So so the proximity is going to definitely foster, some synergy between the program.
Yeah.
And already ITP students can take classes at IDM and vice versa. So there already is a lot of, we know about each other, and we, that's a nice connection there. Also, what are the backgrounds of students in ITP?
How much time you got? We try for as an eclectic a mix as we can. So from backgrounds, we see folks from liberal arts, we see folks from social sciences, we see folks from engineering and sciences, we see folks from business, we see folks, we've had a couple of meditation experts. In my class there was a sword swallower and a glass blower, it was the same guy. A couple of performance artists, we've got dancers, we've got poets, we've got a lot of people from performing arts of various backgrounds, political science. Did I miss anything?
Some journalists.
Oh yeah, journalists.
And we do have the engineers and computer scientists too.
Absolutely,
They come here. Great. And
yeah,
then
I was a computer programmer before I came. So.
Kevin
I
asked.
thought you were a poet.
No, I learned how to be a poet here, actually. I learned everything I know about poetry from Dan Schiffman,
That's awesome.
which explains a lot about my poetry.
From Nancy too.
That makes me happy.
So Kevin asks, my question is for a student like me with philosophy as a background, will I be spending all my time catching up on the tools, or what can I do to prepare myself to make my time more efficient at ITP?
We would love to have philosophers at ITP. It's always wonderful to have people who have like a real critical framework for stuff.
I think, there's often a fear among, an unjustified, I think, fear among folks coming from liberal arts that they're not mathy enough in a way.
Yeah.
And actually one of the things I've always really respected about your work in your class is that in many ways, reading, writing, electronic text is as much a creative writing class as it is a coding class. And
it's also a secret math class. Don't tell anyone.
Right, but it doesn't feel mathy.
Right.
And
exactly.
I think that's the thing. There's plenty that you already know that you don't think you do. I teach a networks class, and 2 days ago we were talking about, blockchain and Bitcoin and all of this, and we got into this deep, intensive discussion of how Heidegger would have felt about all of this. It wasn't my fault, but it made for an interesting and wider discussion as to where we were going, and I think that the philosophical background will be as important to your being here as your ability to do anything else.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like what to do to prepare, it's an interesting and difficult question because it really does depend on like what your goals are. And I think one of the things about ITP is that it helps you figure out what your goals are. So it's hard to say. It's like a chicken and the egg problem. Like how do you prepare for something that you don't know what it is that you're preparing for? If you're interested in programming, then there's like tons of, you could just like start watching Schiffman's videos right now and get a leg up on that, for example. So.
Coding Train, right? Dan Schiffman Coding Train is a great
he's the biggest celebrity at ITP.
Exactly. One of the things that I often push students on in advisement is to start thinking about who is it you care about working for, making things for. It's maybe the hardest question to ask for a lot of people, but once you can answer it, it becomes the most satisfying way to influence your own work. So start thinking about that too.
And one thing I always tell people is to keep a journal, just a journal of your ideas. Even if you don't know the technology or know how you're going to approach it, again, it's about the idea that's important. And then when you're here, you can look back at that journal and start to figure that out. Kind of see, where your mind can take you. So Sophia asked, since we're moving to Brooklyn, will it be a Master of Science? So I just want to clarify, yes, we are moving to Brooklyn, but we're not moving into Tandon. We are staying at the Tisch School of the Arts. So the degree is still our funky Master of Professional Studies, which is a 2-year, 60-credit degree. It's actually more credits than a typical MFA. It's a terminal degree. It's meant to be, it's not necessarily meant to be built off of towards a PhD, although some students do that. It's meant to, take you right into professional practice. So yeah, we're not going into Tandon. We will be physically near them and we'll be collaborating with them, but we are still with the Tisch School of the Arts. So that's a very important distinction.
And we'll still be working very hard to maintain our connections with our Tisch colleagues as well. So don't worry, we're not leaving that behind.
And then this is probably our last question. Quinn has a question about tips for funding and financial aid for the program, which is probably more me. So on the application, there's a financial aid question, yes or no, if you're applying for financial aid. So mark yes if you're looking for any departmental scholarships. If you're a U.S. citizen, you should also file the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. And we look at the application for departmental scholarship decisions. So they're pretty competitive. We do our best, to allocate the funds. We don't have full scholarships. So even if you get a scholarship from us, chances are you're still going to have to look for other sources of funding like loans or outside scholarships or part-time work or something like that. So it's definitely challenging, but doable. Okay, so the last question. Is it possible for someone who has already earned a PhD to apply for the MPS at ITP?
Sure.
Yes,
yours
that
is a terminal
possible.
degree. Just get another terminal degree. We've had a couple PhDs come through in time. What's your PhD in? Well, they're gone probably.
I don't know.
It takes a while for the stream to catch up.
Yeah, that's true. It's like 30-second delay or something. Okay, great. Well, I think that's it. Thank you to all our ITP alumni that joined. Nancy, Magdalena, Pamela. There was a bunch of others. Mike, Buchan, Namira, Ben, JD. Thanks so much, everyone. We are having a few more in-person open house sessions. October 27th, November 3rd, and November 17th. The application deadline is December 1st, so definitely be in touch if you have any further questions. And this stream will be archived on our Facebook page and in Vimeo, so thanks for tuning in. Oh, the PhD, his PhD is in music composition and theory.
Oh, perfect.
Totally, yeah, you'll be great here. Come on in.
Okay. All right,
Thank you.
thanks. Thanks, Allison and Tom.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.